Hi, and welcome to this episode of Differential Diagnosis, where we're looking at possibly the happiest episode in House Season 1, the one with all the dead babies. This is episode 4, Maternity. My name's Harvey. I'm joined by my other host, Gaz.
Pleasure to be here, and using the appropriate name for me now. You'll find in the previous episode he used my birth name, not my actual name, my identified name. So I'm very happy with that. Pleasure to be here as usual. And we're here to survey the 4th episode of Season 1, Maternity. You may have seen there's a pattern occurring here, because in episode 2 it was called Paternity. Now, draw your own conclusions here, but I think David Shaw is a bit of a thinker. He's kind of bringing in different names, a bit of symmetry, mummies and daddies, whatever. You never know, and I think you'll find glorious patterns in the show titles, and I think it's testament to the monument of House and the basically an underappreciated genius of David Shaw.
I couldn't tell if that was all sarcastic.
That's the point.
Well, this episode is it's quite brave of a show to kill a baby in episode 4.
Yeah.
I do wonder if but as always, we always suggest watching the episode before we talk about it. It helps when we're talking about all the dead babies, because you might have forgotten that Maternity has a dead baby in it. I sometimes wonder if maybe David Shaw wanted a dead baby to appear in episode 2. And imagine the negotiations where they went, no, episode 4, and you're only allowed 1. Because I think if David Shaw had been allowed to kill more babies in this episode, he would have. I think he'd have gone rampant.
Yeah, I don't know. He might have just been able to extract just 1 out of the producers. I mean, it's quite a taboo subject in the Western, and well, actually, not just the Western world, but the entirety of the world. Yeah. Killing a baby. A baby dying. Well, yeah. David Shaw doesn't...
I don't think it's popular anywhere.
David Shaw isn't killing a baby. He's... the baby dies of a disease.
Yeah.
So it's not like David Shaw is some sort of god or some sort of maniacal mastermind.
He could have made House just find a magical cure. He didn't have to kill the baby.
Maybe he doesn't have any control over the fictional characters. Maybe they.
He's not like spirit writing. But that would explain some of the characters in this show.
Oh yeah,
David Shaw's just out of it.
I agree. I think there's an element where David Shaw has been directed by the characters to write these episodes, and who knows how these characters operate within the mind of David Shaw, and also the other writers that we will come across. I don't even know if he wrote this episode or not, but it's quite a gamble to, say on the opening season, the major proposition of this, the first proposition of this the series, and say, hey, we deal with dead babies.
Yeah, I think this episode's significant. It's definitely got a much darker tone to the other ones.
Yes, I mean, it opens with a shot of a baby looking a bit annoyed, maybe a bit quizzical, like me, when I first set eyes upon this baby.
Well, this is like some of the strongest opening dialogue.
I nearly won a marathon. Nearly. What stopped him?
Well, that's how complex the characters are.
What, did he fall over?
So much backstory.
Was it he ran out of gas? Did he not use the right nutrition scheme to succeed so he can run 26.2 miles?
So do you yeah, like I think I mean do you think these characters are better well written better written than the previous like college couple?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, because it fits in with my theory that the older they are, the smarter they get in David Shaw's um, kind of universe. His oh shit, the baby's going a bit weird. Oh god, it's seizing. That's
Yeah,
horrendous.
it starts off it starts off with a full on baby seizure. Like that's the thing. I think this like this I think it would have been great if this episode had been episode 3 because I think this like does a lot of stuff really well, which we'll get to.
So
But I think definitely you needed to be eased into like the nice atmosphere of the hospital, how it's quite playful
yes,
before you got to this bit.
yes. I
Yeah,
mean,
but it's a very strong like 4th episode in terms of it's certainly a lot darker I think throughout,
oh
but
yeah,
it doesn't lose any of the humor as well, which I think is a like really cements the show as having a really like good like grasp of its tone.
yes. It's very well written in that respect because it does. Oh, we're in. Yeah, it does have that quality of being able to balance those things quite well, and I think it
Mm.
helps that there's always a kind of sarcastic, misanthropic tone to Gregory House, MD.
Yeah, because he like yeah even like there's even segments where like House is obviously sarcastic all the time, but there's even segments where they're talking about how they want to experiment on another baby,
Mm,
and Cuddy says like, and they're like, oh, how are we going to get the baby to stay in the hospital so we
mm,
can experiment on it, and they want to use it as control while they're trying to diagnose the children,
mm,
and Cuddy's like, oh, I'll just tell the parents he's got smallpox or something, like,
mm.
but I quite enjoy that all of the characters kind of have that like that dark edge that doctors often do. If you've been around doctors, they're usually quite a cynical bunch.
Wow.
So it's nice that like it's not just House who's the kind of crass one and the dark humoured one. They all have an element of that.
Yeah. Especially this pediatrician dude who kind of just says, "Ah, just deliver him." It's like a deadbeat cop.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, we had a
Well,
murder in so and so, blah 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 blah, whatever. We just
yeah.
processed it as usual. But House goes, "Hang on a minute."
Well, the pediatrician's like a good example of that. Like I mean, he sort of walks in to help these people with a seizing baby, acting like a bit disgruntled, a bit of an asshole. But he doesn't have the wit or genius of House, so he'll never be a House.
No.
He's sort of House, but without all the charm.
I,
But he does at
mm,
least like indicate that not all the doctors in that hospital are just nice. Like they're clearly people. They have some depth.
yeah. Well, concealed depth for us because David Shaw can't give us an entire episode dedicated, or a season, or 8 seasons dedicated to the jaded, meandering life of a pediatrician.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a spin-off about that pediatrician, I might watch it. I'd like to know more.
You'd like to know more. Wow. But it's basically saying, not all doctors are like Wilson, for instance.
Yeah,
They're all. But I think it borrows from the crime, that kind of criminal procedural where you kind of have like a setup where someone just, it's a jaded cop, been on the beat for too long, not enough holiday, stressed out family, you name it.
mm.
And then the primary character kind of goes, oh, there's something here that you've missed because you're too tired or worn out or burnt out to see it. So I think they're borrowing a little bit from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they do. I think David Shaw has in interviews said that like they wanted to treat like the germs like they're criminals.
Oh,
I
wow.
think it is done a bit like a police procedural.
Mm,
Yeah, no, that's a great thing that you observe that because he has said that as well.
mm,
So I guess it's quite a testament that he's managed to carry that through.
mm.
so quickly.
Wow,
He's
I feel like a pawn in David Shaw's game now.
yeah, he's fucking incepted you.
Oh my god, I'm done.
the the thing I really like about this opening, I'm not sure you agree, but is that, so the opening is that um House like notices that there's a pattern that two children are sick, two babies in the maternity ward, and then he sends the team to go looking for any other sick children, babies, to prove his theory that he thinks there's been an outbreak. And there's something I can't quite tell if it's just from, I don't know if Hugh Laurie's doing this on purpose as part of his delivery, but I get the sense that there's like, even after all the babies on the like that ward have been checked, like House wants to keep checking like other wards and is looking for more babies to check.
Yeah.
And I get the sense that House is almost quite excited by the idea of an outbreak. Like he doesn't want to give up, and even when all the evidence suggests that actually there is no outbreak and all the children are fine, there's like a part of him that wants to keep looking. And I know they've established this whole like that he's, incredibly obsessive. But I also think that he also, like, at that moment, he's obsessive about finding it, not because he thinks he's necessarily right, but I think there's a part of him that kind of wants that. He wants to be interested by trying to solve an entire like medical outbreak on a baby ward.
I think, yeah, you're right. And also, I think there's a fine line between kind of being irrational and being ingenious, in the sense that the only difference is one conclusion is proven right and the other is proven wrong. If he was shown to be wrong that there was an outbreak, he'd look like a bit of a loon just wandering into the paediatric ward, to these maternity wards, and just checking babies for no real reason.
So, well, this is where they start the initial diagnosis, and they go with a bacterial infection, and they decide to treat the children with two antibacterials, which will be revealed that eventually all of the babies' kidneys are failing, and that they discover that the two antibiotics that they're using both cause kidney failure. So they then have to deduce how they're going to be able to solve which one is doing which, and they come to some very hard truths about how they'll resolve that.
Oh yeah, they end up in a kind of moral dilemma. Well, not a kind of moral dilemma, definitely a moral dilemma.
Well, absolutely. Like, do you because it's quite an interesting. So the plan that they eventually come up with, and what I find quite strange, especially in this scene where they're discussing it, is that Foreman thinks it's MRSA, and Cameron thinks it's something else, and the decision that they come basically Cameron is saying, oh, we should take them off this one of the antibiotics, and Foreman is saying, oh, we should take them off the other, and that they're just kind of guessing. And then House says, oh, well, we don't have to guess. We we don't have to guess. We can just do a control where we take one baby off one and one baby off the other and see what happens. And it's quite funny because Foreman and Cameron then start yelling at him saying, oh my God, you're endangering these babies. You can't play with people's lives like that. Whereas they were just about to blindly take both babies off it, therefore possibly killing them both.
Yeah,
without any further evidence, which isn't really like, is a really strange scene. I'm not really sure. Like, I know the whole thing is to show, like, I mean, House comes up with a great idea, a great way of resolving the issue, and it's incredibly heartless and it's extremely logical. But the kind of like blindsidedness of both of them to realize the irony that they just wanted to do the same thing, but both, and learn nothing.
But that's kind of the advantage of him being focused on not the puzzle rather than the human element, because it gives him the advantage of saying, well, what is the most rational course of action? Either both die and learn nothing, or one dies and you learn something. And to him, that's infinitely better. I mean, morally, it's better as well. It's an easy choice to make once it's framed like that, but it's not easy when you're kind of conflicted.
Well, I guess it's possible that they're both bothered by the unfairness of it, which still seems equally, like, short-sighted. Because if both babies die because you took a guess, it doesn't make it any less unfair.
Yeah. I mean, if you want it to be fair, then both can die. But
Yeah, exactly.
in a
Like, yeah,
way,
well, just remove all the antibiotics.
yeah. So
Yeah,
it's
no, that's
fair,
completely fair.
level playing
We know
field.
exactly what's going to happen.
But life is not fair. Well, in the universe of House MD.
Yeah, I think there's a weird line of from House in the earlier episode that we were talking about, where House says like reality is wrong, which is like supposed to be quite like poignant, but doesn't really make any
Yeah.
sense. There are quite a few of those lines. We should make a tally where House says something like quite deep and dark, but it doesn't actually mean anything.
Yeah, it would be absurd for a man of science to say such things. Okay, so Cameron's getting a little bit conflicted here.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, ooh.
Well, I think this is one of those. This is a great episode. Not only I really like this episode. A lot of it is to do with how Cameron is handled in this episode. I think that Cameron is like her kind of, she's really like separated from the group in that she kind of, you know, you get some character out. Like before, she just seems like a competent, nice doctor, and in this episode, they really deal with her complete inability to be honest. And as you've noticed, like she's very awkward around the patients, and this is like the next level of that. Like she's not just socially awkward; she is kind of half lying to people and rationalizing it.
Yeah, it seems like she's putting up a like barrier between her and patients in a way that
Yeah.
is primarily there not to protect them but to protect herself. And the thing that I've noticed is that she's got some sort of past, which it just seems like that. You just get this inkling that there's some sort of past to her that she's not divulged yet, that I think affects her ability to practice as a doctor. And it might be good and bad in those ways, but yeah.
Well, she definitely she has that line where she says yeah, she has that line where she says, "Oh, it's harder to watch people die than it is to die," which hints at, you know, what's coming next
Okay.
about her background. But I think one of the like yeah, what's then quite interesting about that is she later rationalizes that it doesn't matter what she tells the patient, that they won't remember it when it's happened. And as you say, like that could be her putting up a barrier trying to defend herself, or it could be that she remembers hearing that bad news
Yeah.
and that she doesn't, you know, she's been on the other side of it. So she actually knows that whatever she tells the patient, it doesn't actually matter. Which,
We got the parasite scene now. It's very good. This is a pretty good part.
yeah. No, this is a great one. And this is one of those clinic stories which you only follow one person in the clinic, one patient.
Oh, that's not. Yeah, that's true. And there is another character in this small clinic case, though. There is another character. The other thing that tells me is that David Shaw treats these the patients in these clinic cases with absolute contempt because they are just so dumb. Like this one in particular just sounds like a complete moron.
Well, he treats them with almost as much contempt as House does.
I think even more because he's
Yeah.
created them. House never had a choice but to confront them.
Well, the interesting thing about, so I mean this isn't really like thematically tied. This is just about babies or parasites,
Yeah.
as House puts it. But the thing I quite like about this one is that, so the setup for anyone who doesn't remember it quite as well is that a woman comes in, you know, with some problems. House diagnoses that she's pregnant, and it turns out that she basically had cheated on her boyfriend after they had an argument, and she's not sure who the baby's is, and she is asking House help to try and like do a paternity test on the unborn baby, but without telling the father, which House initially refuses to do. But he later goes on to do so when she brings in the boyfriend and they pretend that it's a mono test. But the thing,
Yeah, it's Yeah.
The thing I quite like about this one is, you remember in the last episode, like House helped that woman out for getting a full body scan to screw over her private healthcare because he was
Yeah.
like, hurting someone else. He was hurting the authority. I quite like this one that he actually ends up helping her
Yeah.
when he doesn't need to. There's something. I mean, obviously, it's an incredibly fucked up situation, and maybe he's getting some sort of like dark enjoyment out of helping this woman lie to her husband. But yeah, it's one of the few cases where House seems to do something just to do it and be nice.
Yeah. Out of the goodness of his own heart.
I'm not sure whether or not that makes him inconsistent or more interesting.
Yeah. Okay, now they're objecting to his course of action, which is to try and alleviate the kidney failure of 5 by technically maybe sacrificing 1.
Which, yeah, because what's strange about this decision is that House then goes to visit Cuddy and the lawyer about this decision
Yeah.
to basically use one baby as a control, and the lawyer is saying like, you can't do this, and then he does it anyway, and it never no seems sort of, there's no reprimanding or no problems from it,
Yeah.
which in a way I quite like that the scene happens, because it kind of show, I do like when they show the admin and the thought and the,
Mm.
like, it's not just House doing something crazy and everyone goes okay.
It's not like a rubber stamp. Although, yeah, it's not a rubber stamp situation for House. But the lawyer says, "Oh, I don't need a good medical justification. I just need a medical justification so that we don't get sued." It's like, all right.
Yeah, in a way it's quite a ridiculous scene in that extent, like they're kind of unveiling like kind of the hypocrisy of the hotel of the hospital, and they're not really there to treat patients, they're just there to give excuses for why they treated patients so that they can not be sued. It's an extremely
Yeah.
like cynical look at how our hospital runs.
Yeah. Yes. And then they have to he has to get consent from the parents, and so he kind of disperses this task to his underlings. And Cameron has a bit of an issue with it.
She does. Well, just to before we leave this scene, what I quite like as well is that Cuddy is disagreeing with House,
Yeah.
but at the end just says, "I'll do what you think is best," and then obviously House just goes and does what his plan was because that's
Yeah.
what he thinks is best. And I quite like that. Like, Cuddy is almost saying that, knowing that she's condemning a baby to death, but she kind of dissociates herself from it. Like, it's almost like she kind of agrees with House, but he's the only person with the kind of disconnect to make decisions like that.
Yeah, she trusts House to get it right. And I think she also understands the logic of his argument, which is, look, it's a shitty situation, and we have to kind of make it work. Now you have those two choices: you either all the babies die and you learn nothing, or two of the babies die and you learn nothing, or one of the babies dies and you learn something. But now we've got this little split scene bit where Foreman and Cameron are talking to the two different sets of parents, and Foreman's just right down, it's a Hail Mary pass. We don't know if it's going to work or not, but we've got to give it a go. Whereas Cameron, it's a little bit different. She admits it. She sugarcoats it in a way that is actually lying or half lying.
Yeah, there's three instances of Cameron talking to the patients, and I think progressively she gets worse.
We'll know in 24 hours if it's working, but omits to say if it's not working, it's your child is going to die.
Yeah.
Now she's seeking counsel from Wilson, who probably has the most expertise in this area as an oncologist.
Well, I think this episode, I think in a way, because Cameron has a character growth in this episode, just based on how we view her interactions with patients. And in a way, it's like, by proxy of her having that growth, we also kind of separates her from Wilson because they stop being just, nice doctors who are nice people. Like, we actually then see how Wilson is actually very down to the line about you must tell the patient the truth and prepare them. So even though
Yeah.
Wilson's kind and a nice guy in that sense, he actually, like, he's still a realist. Like, he thinks being nice is that he wants to, tell the patient the truth, and not in the way that House does, where he's just telling them the patient, like, the truth to be cruel, like he's being
Yeah.
too truthful. Like, Wilson
Mm.
just wants the patient to be informed. And I think, like, even though initially at the start of this episode they might have been like, I think they kind of run into each other as just being like, oh, nice doctors. I think, like, just based on their actions of how they treat the patient, this episode starts to really separate,
Mm.
like, the characters into their kind of like minutiae of what
Yeah.
makes them different.
You also see just at the end of that scene, the kind of you see Wilson's reaction. And you kind of see that he senses vulnerability in Cameron, and senses that something isn't quite right. That there's something underlying in her character or past which is preventing her from confronting the task. And you see that House says, "Just do it. You've got to do it. That's just your job. You have to inform people if their children die or survive or whatever. You can't just pick the good outcome as your preferred, as where you will inform them. You have to also bring in the bad."
Absolutely. And it's quite interesting that House and Wilson agree on that.
Although I think Wilson's a little bit more humane because he goes in the end and actually informs the parents because he sensed that vulnerability in her because Cameron was avoiding the difficult task ahead and he had seen it.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
actually, you're right. Whereas House says you should have just forced her to do it.
Yeah, he didn't see the human the human side of Cameron in that respect. Only saw the doctor.
No, it's a good point. I mean, there's a lot of minutia being set up.
Yeah,
A lot of small, like, conflicts of how the characters handle the same situation. Yeah, I genuinely think this is like a really good episode for that.
Yeah.
It really, like, stands out as one I remember very well. If only it was just orange as well.
Orange.
I think
Yeah.
I think that would have completed the look. I think there's two couples in this episode, and the husband and
Yeah.
wife. I think it's a husband and wife and the lesbian couple, or I can't tell if
Yeah.
it's like a woman and her sister. I don't think it's ever actually established.
Yeah.
But yeah, the husband and wife are definitely like. I mean, for the whole series, I think they're better patients. They're more. I mean, they're not even the patient, which is the interesting thing. Like, there's a baby as a patient, but obviously the baby can't really have a character. It's not going to say anything interesting. It's like 2 days old. But they're like, as you said, like, she's having a chat with, like, Cameron Chase about how their marriage might fail, and it does feel like there's, like, thoughts there behind the characters. Like, they're worrying about things. They're thinking about the situation.
It also raises the stakes.
Yeah, no,
they lose their child. They're not in. Well, of course, losing a child is devastating, but it will also be the disintegration of their relationship potentially, or they've already kind of resigned themselves to that fate. So there's so much more. There's so much at stake, not just the life of the child. You also see the relentlessness of Chase. He will not give up.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think they very specifically wanted Chase to do something in this episode, and even though he doesn't have a lot to do, I think they made him be the one to do the what's it called? It's not CPR when you're shocking.
Defibrillation.
Yeah, like, he defibs that kid specifically so you can see him not give up. It shows like especially with the fact that he knows that a marriage might fail because of it. Like, he's doing his best to just, like, push on.
But that they were worrying. She was worrying because she was fully informed. The other two, they didn't have any clue what was going to happen next, and they just wandered up to the area, and here we go. This is a critical moment.
Oh, you know what? I hadn't actually noticed that. the couple that's been informed is like she's already thinking, oh,
Yeah,
our
she's
marriage will
worried.
end.
She's scared shitless.
Yeah. Whereas, yeah, you're right. The other couple is just standing there, just
Like,
going,
what?
what?
Yeah. So it kind of puts paid to a whole assertion of, well, it doesn't matter what I say to them.
Mm.
It's not going to change anything, but actually it changes a lot.
Yeah. No, that's a good observation about how evil Cameron is.
She's not evil. she's just a bit weird.
Yeah.
Like I say, she's awkward. She doesn't like conflict.
Mm.
She likes making conflict. Doesn't like but she avoids conflict with patience because she has her own experiences, obviously.
Mm.
Here we go. Wilson comes in.
I really like the way this scene is done, that we don't actually have any dialogue. I think it's just a nicely directed little scene where through the body language you know what's happening.
Yeah.
Although I do like the way it's edited, because it looks like Wilson just walks up, goes, "Your baby's dead," and then wanders off.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, just walks off casually.
Well, like, because it's so quick, he only says like 2 things.
And also looming over Cameron, who just is completely speechless.
Yeah.
And then just walks away, having had taking zero responsibility for anything.
Absolutely.
Which I think pisses off House.
Oh yeah, extremely. But then again, he doesn't confront Cameron instantly. He checks with people. He like asks Wilson, and then he goes, like, he actually confronts Wilson about not forcing her to do it. But he does go over and ask Foreman later, and say like, "Oh, how's she doing?"
Yeah.
And I get the sense that he's trying to weigh up why she didn't do it.
Yeah.
And actually, like, at least try and emote as much as he can. Or else he just storm up to Cameron and say, "Oh, you fucking ridiculous doctor, you should be fired."
Which I think Dr. House is well within rights to do.
Yeah.
I think it's a necessary responsibility, and she shirked it because it was a bit too real for her.
Absolutely. Whereas Wilson just went in there, he went, "Hey, your baby's dead. Go home."
And then
Wandered
Wilson
off.
says maybe, but Wilson then also says maybe Cameron should do research. Maybe she shouldn't be on the front lines. Maybe she shouldn't be in this fellowship.
Yeah.
Questioning her ability to be a doctor.
Yeah, I mean, if any, like, House has never said that. Like, that's actually quite a cruel thing for him to say.
No, he's ranting and raving about how we don't use antibiotics properly.
Yeah, this is another, like, they clearly had a big folder of doctor tropes that they wanted to get through, and, like, over-vaccination is, like...
Well, it's not
vaccination.
It's not over-vaccination, it's like...
Over-prescription of antibiotics. Yeah, no, I mean, it's one of the ones on the list that they wanted to check off, which is why House just does a monologue about it, when everyone in the room agrees.
Yeah, I wonder if it's a new thing at this point in 2004. I mean, for us, it's quite a commonplace thing to hear about superbugs, but MRSA was a big thing back then, I think.
That's true. And then this is the scene that once again shows
a lovely transition from one scene to the other as well, a close up of his head.
But once again, it goes from a scene where he's just going, "Oh, over vaccinating's ridiculous, go home," and then to him doing an autopsy on a baby, and it weirdly it goes from quite jokey to relatively depressing, because it has this slow pull out to reveal what he's doing.
Yeah,
and I think it's but it all works tonally. It's like the show really does strike a pretty incredible tone.
Yeah,
that it does pull off very well.
Well, it's a similar thing to how he was doing the grunt work on the research in last episode, Occam's Razor, where he's just sitting at the desk doing the research, putting in the hours, and in the same way he's doing that there. He's having to do this his autopsy.
And then it turns out that the whole thing was pointless, and that it was a viral infection instead, which is particularly bleak, and no one really focuses on it, I guess, because the reality is that there's nothing really to focus on.
It'd be really heavy hitting for a program to go, "Crap, we got it wrong."
Yeah, but they don't focus on
dead.
That. It's barely brought up. It's like, "Oh yeah, we were wrong."
They have to but they're scientists, they're doctors, they're clinicians, they have to focus on the here and now and what they can save now, rather than dwell on what. It's like, baby's dead because we gave them 2 lots of antibiotics and their kidneys failed. Oh well.
Yeah, it's true. I think in another show that probably would have been like a really big plot point where everyone would have felt guilty. But instead
But
the show kind of instead doesn't focus on them feeling guilty for their decisions, because at the end of the day they're just like they're doing educated guesses. It's instead like how they handle those decisions, which is, telling the parents that their baby might not die correctly.
I think also it would make the writing very clunky. Like the plot wouldn't work properly for about 40 or 50-minute show. So having them delve deep into the moral philosophy of what could have been a avoidable death would have just been a bit overkill.
Yeah.
And also a little bit too controversial, I guess. Even, well,
What do you mean in terms of like it would make?
It would bring up so many questions, so many moral conundra that need resolving in order to get to the end of the show.
Be like an hour and a half episode.
Well, probably a multi-part episode. The house inquiry into unnecessary deaths.
Yeah, the lawyer would come back. Just be like, "Oh, I hope you gave them a good reason.
I hope you gave them informed consent." Whoops. Cameron's just delving into a book randomly.
Well, hey, I mean, I'm glad that this scene is showing them reading and in the lab. I really think that the series starts to lose that.
You think? Ah.
Yeah. Which it's what I mean. I'd love to hear your observations when we get to those bits or when you notice it.
Yeah.
Because in hindsight, it's just like that just them reading and learning and researching. It's I know it would be repetitive in the long run, but I think they're really nice little touches that make it just seem like these people, as you say, are scientists.
Yeah.
Like that they don't just know all the answers.
Or that there's just a magic eureka moment. There's hard work at play being used here. They have to work hard for the answer.
Well, this episode's quite rare because there isn't really a eureka moment in this episode.
No.
Like they go from doing the control group, killing a baby, finding out it's not antivirus, it's a viral infection, and then here they test the babies, and it turns out that the babies have have antibodies for all the viruses or most of them, and then they realize that it's the mother's antibodies causing that issue. So then they test the parents.
Yep.
See which antibodies differ, and then they know what the babies have, and it's they solve it. I think they solve it about 40 minutes into a 50-minute episode. It's it's an extremely clear-cut case. There isn't really a eureka moment. There's then House then sort of spends a little time afterwards thinking about what could have been the source of the virus. I think trying to cement that idea that he never leaves a case alone. It's not just about solving it, which they've done for the last 2 episodes now.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really follow the House formula in that way.
Yeah.
Which it's a nice change. I'm glad that even this early on, they're not sticking to the formula.
Yeah, there's grunt work involved. And also, they do discuss the limits of sanguinating babies. That they could get about good 5 or 6 tests out of each baby.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there we go. He's circled the virus that's responsible. That's the end of the episode. That's the end of the case.
That would be the end of the episode if it was a conventional medical procedural drama.
Absolutely.
Alas.
Well, this episode is definitely, it's less about the medicine. I think this is a very character-heavy episode, and as you say, like in another medical procedure, it would have now ended.
Yeah.
But this episode isn't focused on the medicine at all. It's entirely about what the characters are going through and trying to expand on the characters.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it such a great episode. Like it's an extremely dramatic episode, and the drama isn't from going like, oh, where did the virus come from? The drama is in how everyone handles that crisis.
Yes. And it's good. It's good in that respect.
Yeah, I mean they take for a prime time, show, which up until this point have been relatively light-hearted. They've they're definitely they're making the situation have gravity, They're definitely showing the nitty-gritty of like two parents crying over their newly born baby. Like they're not being flippant about it and just using it as like the background for a...
But it also shows the positive aspect of Cameron's character flaw, which is she wants them to be able to look after the baby in at least some limited way. Whereas if she had been just down the line clinical like House or detached, that wouldn't have happened.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
so
there's a bit of resolution to that. It's like, well, yeah, she shirked her responsibility as a doctor, but she gave something more to the patients.
She's overthinking what the patient's going through. So yeah, as you say, like in this situation where this episode's over effectively. The medical conundrum's been solved, but she lets the parents be involved in the treatment. And as you say, it shows that she's too caring. And at points where nothing's going wrong, that's perfect. She allows like patients to have a great time and really be able to heal. But at the worst moment, she's just completely incapable of making anyone upset and just shirks responsibility.
I think it's a matter of her character flaw is a virtue in some instances and a vice in others. It was a virtue in that situation where she was able to empathise with the parents, and use it for good, and it reinforced their relationship. But it's a vice when it comes to confronting difficult truths.
I do. I mean, all the characters. You're right about that. Like a lot of the characters follow that pattern. I do wonder if they. I mean, I imagine there must have been a lot of discussion about this when when developing the characters, because everyone does seem to follow that. Like, House, he's really intelligent, and he knows how to get the job done, but take that too far. And then like Foreman's a different level of that, and then there's the traditionally positive qualities like being nice and kind and empathetic, and then yet again Cameron and Wilson are on different elements of that. It's definitely an episode that starts separating the characters, even though they're fundamentally like come from the same places. Either they're nice or they're too logical or anything, but then it kind of shows how those qualities start to differentiate them slightly.
Yeah, and then David Shaw wants to pull the elastic as far back as possible.
Yeah.
To see how extreme these character flaws or characters, like features of the characters, can be distorted or extended or stressed.
And yet again, 10 minutes ago the case was solved, and they wait 10 minutes before Chase tells the family, hey, everything's fine. Which it's just a long tail end extension, because we knew that everything would be fine.
Oh, and you see Cameron's excluded from it. She's on her own in that shot, whereas Foreman and Chase are there to regale in the glory of saving this child, and Cameron just is there going, "Oh, I'm drinking some coffee." A bit awkward again.
Why are you doing an impression of Cameron like that?
I don't know.
Have any respect.
I just feel like it's her inner monologue rather than her external one.
I was being fucking rude about Cameron a couple of episodes ago. Now I've turned. I'm like, she's great.
Yeah, I shut you down. I think one of us has to fulfill rotating duties on shitting on characters every so often.
Fair enough.
No, she's a go-getter though. She's ambitious, but yeah, this is a character flaw. Now they're discussing it. House is confronting her.
Well, he's confronting her and curious about why she's doing what she's doing. So he's not just giving her a bollocking. He's curious. He's being nosy.
Yeah.
He's
He wants to solve this puzzle because each of his underlings, his fellows, they are puzzles to him as well. He wants to figure out who they are. He wants to see how they tick. She's the more mysterious of them all.
Yeah, well, he's worked out Chase has a rich daddy, Yeah. Foreman's got his street smarts.
Well, not a rich daddy, a very, very well-connected and reputable doctor in his own right.
That's true.
Correctly.
But yeah, as you say, like Cameron's the mystery, which, I mean, I guess in a way, like, it's possible that that's even been on purpose, and the that I felt she had bad character development in the earlier episodes might have been, a purposeful thing that they wanted her to be more mysterious.
Oh, perhaps, yeah.
And this is the again, this is the obsessive epilogue, as you say. This is where House has to know,
He's in the haystack. He has to look for the needle.
and the outcome of the episode is that there's a woman giving teddy bears out to the babies who is incredibly ill and almost killed 6 children, who I don't believe gets any kind of telling off.
She's the ultimate villain. But you see, this is the thing. It always cuts to House looking and realizing who that person is, but you don't see the action afterwards. And that happens a few times. She might be out of there. She's gone.
I don't. I get the feeling that House wouldn't say anything.
Unless he's just happy with knowing that he solved it. But then she's a medical risk. Surely you'd want to nip that one in the bud.
Well, I mean, is this a critique of, like, American sick pay and how people are forced to come into work even when they're too ill?
Wow, you're looking deep into this. And as a lawyer, maybe he's dealt with cases like that, Mr. David Shaw.
Absolutely.
But does he do anything? So he does a little wry smile, but you don't see something coming out of his mouth. So I'm not convinced that nothing happened. He's not that.
We think he just knocked her out. Then and there.
Knocked her out. I needed to process that for a moment. Do you think just went out with his cane and said, "Unclean," and just started whacking the living shit out of that woman? I wouldn't put it past Mr. David Shaw. He just killed a baby.
He's a sick bastard. Well, yeah. Overall, what are your thoughts on episode 4, Maternity?
Well, the kicker at the end is that he took on the maternity case in the clinic as a means to get access to the lounge. But it's a really strong episode. I think it does more of the kind of, like you say, the character work. Develops the characters a little bit more, puts them in a difficult situation where they have to make a difficult moral dilemma that then later seems unnecessary. So that's great. Great for prime time. Makes you think, doesn't it? Don't have nightmares.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a good, strong character episode.
Yes, I agree.
I can't remember the future episodes. I hope there's more, because the character episodes are by far the best ones.
Yeah, but I liked Occam's Razor, but you're not so enamoured by it because I guess it hasn't got that character development that you're looking for. It's static House.
That's true. I think I do like Occam's Razor. I just think compared to this, I think after seeing this episode, I realised that what my favourite episodes were, because I really enjoyed episode 2 as well, Paternity, just because it was a really good, like, character development episode. And maybe once the characters are developed, the character episodes won't be as strong because they'll just be finding things to talk about. But I think in terms of, like, what I've enjoyed so far, having rewatched the series, like, the character development episodes are definitely my favourite. It's been nice to see how slowly the characters are introduced and how, like, sort of how layered everything is.
Yeah, you're not dealing with your average Joe drama where the characters are basically manufactured beforehand. You're introduced to them in episode 1 and all the character growth is done there and then you just follow that on. And you may have situations where their scenarios or situations change, but actually their characters don't. It's like, oh, how does this character who's fairly static react to an interesting situation that may, affect them permanently? But then once that happens, like, a character loses their legs or something, and they become, wheelchair bound, but the character doesn't change, but their situation does, and the situation is seen as like a poor substitute for the character development, creating that story or those difficulties that really need to be done to have something that's really unique and interesting, like House.
Absolutely. Well, I think I agree with that as well. Like it does something that other shows don't do, especially at the time. In that, I think in another show, and I don't have specific examples, but I have like sort of a generalization of shows doing this. Is I think possibly in shows like Lost a little bit. If a character had like a mysterious backstory, that would be the mystery in and of itself.
Yeah.
Whereas you learn about the character's backstory not through flashbacks like how Lost would do it, but like you get that Cameron has a backstory through her actions and knowing that she's not quite acting right in these situations, and like the little things she says, there's clearly something going on, but that backstory is affecting how she's acting now, and that's how it's deduced. It's not just like a mysterious thing, and I quite like that the show then doesn't tell us what that is. It's something to learn later, and even though it's a small subplot, it like gives a lot of depth to her. Whereas I think in other shows, it probably would have just been like with the wheelchair example that you just gave, it would have been just a mystery, but it wasn't actually having any effect on the character now or changing the way they behave.
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a thing. People just lazily write their characters and say, okay, if I just maim them or I change something about them or, I make them get a divorce or something, that in itself is sufficient for character development. But actually, no. And for Lost, in defense of Lost, the reason why those flashbacks work so well is because you've had this massive event at the beginning of Lost, and then everyone's question is, what were they like before that? What makes them interesting now? Why do they have this approach to certain people, and why do they interact with other characters in different ways? That seems weird from the outset, but you're right. House does approach this from a different angle, and does approach the idea of character development from a different angle. I mean, as in this episode, I think, and this isn't to say that static character development is a bad thing. I mean, you look at Star Trek, The Next Generation, and it's basically the same characters over and over and over and over again, put in crazy, wacky situations. What's interesting about that is how those characters, as we know them, confront the issues ahead of them, and then it's all reset afterwards. Apart from multi-part episodes, or the one example I can think of for TNG is Picard and the Borg thing.
Absolutely.
But apart from that, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to make a character-driven show, like House is trying to do, and it does it really well.
Yeah, and the characters do. I mean, I assume we'll have to watch a few episodes to notice it, but the characters definitely, at the moment, they're trying to explain why the characters are the way they are.
Yeah.
But going forward, we'll see how they change, which the show definitely does do, as you say, more than like TNG does. I think the most character development that anyone has in TNG is that Picard just hates children in season 1 and then doesn't hate children in season 2 just because they dropped it.
Yeah.
Less so than he developed.
Yeah, and I was just saying with TNG, that's its format, that's its formula, that's how it works, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just is when you try and you try and create a show where character development is part of it. House does that very well. And the other thing about character development with House is that it shows, it doesn't tell, which is really good. It treats the audience with respect, that they can get it. That someone like me can just go, all right, yeah, Cameron's got this. Something's going on with Cameron.
Yeah.
Something's not quite right. The way people interact with House is there's something not quite right with the way they do that. And I'm hoping that I'll see that, and that'll get shown to me rather than, oh, didn't you know House is a bit of a druggie or something, or House has a bit of a weird thing, telling me point blank through like dialogue or something.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So
Absolutely. Well, that was episode 4, Maternity.
so many left. How many episodes of House are there? It's like 100 and...
There's about 200 and something.
I don't think it's like 200. Isn't it like 180, 170?
It's close to 200. It's getting there.
Okay.
Well,
So we're only 4 episodes into that.
oh, we'll do multiple. We'll start doing multiple. We'll burn through them.
2% in.
Yeah. We'll just cover like the shit seasons, like season 5 and like 1 episode.
No, we can't do that. It's a disservice to our audience.
Absolutely. All 3 of them, probably.
Oh
All right,
my
well,
God.
episode 4, Maternity. A great episode, I think we both agree.
I agree.
And join us next week when we'll be talking about episode 5, but we might talk about a few episodes. It depends. It depends on how much we find to talk about. But thank you to Gaz for joining me to chat about this.
Thank you.
Excellent. We'll see you next week.